Hello and welcome, my name is Trismegistus, and today we're going to be reading through and worming into the latest Factorio Friday Facts. Friday Facts 429. Vulcanus Demolisher Enemies. Posted by Erendel. Hello, welcome back to Vulcanus. It's been a while. Okay, so this is the big reveal on the Vulcanus enemies. The title sort of gives you a clue, but if you're not into spoilers, you want to go in with surprises, and you don't want to know what the enemies are, then do not watch this video, do not read the Friday Facts, don't watch the Factorio videos on there. Basically, it's just a massive spoiler for what that enemy is and approximately how it works. So that's just the warning. So the other thing to note is I played at the LAN, but I did not actually go to Vulcanus. I did, however, watch my teammates playing on Vulcanus, so they did encounter this enemy. I also, there was a lot of sort of feedback about the enemies. Quite an important note that Erendel makes about what we experienced at the LAN compared to kind of what it's going to be in the release game. But I personally have not fought a Demolisher, and I can give a bit of a sort of what the feeling was on them, although, as I say, not from direct experience. The other thing to note on these is they are subject to change. They are tweaking things and, making balance passes and all of this sort of stuff for the release version. You place your new prototype big mining drills, the pinnacle of resource extraction technology, on the closest tungsten deposit to your fledgling Vulcanus factory. A few power piles later, and they are happily mining away, providing a new, constant source of valuable tungsten. A rail ramp and station just about fit in the area too, but without any rail supports in your inventory, that line isn't going anywhere soon. Transport belt will have to do for now. As you're returning to the main factory, placing transport belt to connect this new resource to your base, you feel a trembling from the ground. Big mining drills make a lot of vibrations, but this is on a whole new level. Something else must be going on. You head back towards the mining site. Across a river of lava, you see a truly gargantuan creature snake its way around a volcano. This formidable beast most closely resembles a centipede or millipede, but it's larger than a train. As it moves forward, the ground at its face is broken apart, leaving a trail of torn-up rock and patchy lava. Trees, rocks, even cliffs are torn apart by its passage. Ash is flung into the air, making an abrasive cloud, blankets its body and lingers long after it has moved on. The creature roars and speeds up. As it does so, it starts shaking the ground harder. Rhythmic vibrations agitate a wide area around it, kicking up a huge cloud of ash and destabilising the terrain. Then we've got the sort of first part of the video. The YouTube one is actually complete, and this is done in two sections here. It is on the Factorio YouTube in 4K. I would recommend watching the video fully there. However, my internet is not good enough to stream 4K to you, so we will watch the smaller versions that are in the actual Friday Facts. So we will watch it through. It does have some audio, it does have some music and some sound effects, so we'll just watch it and we'll talk about it afterwards. But yeah, this is our first sight of the Demolisher. Or your first sight of the Demolisher anyway. Okay, yes, so the big wormy boy. Really it's more like a snake, I would say. It's a sort of segmented design, so as Erendel says, it's more based on like a millipede or a centipede, something like that. Obviously this is preambly bit here, and then it turns out, and basically, as you can see, it kind of goes for the turrets roughly first. It does a snaking path, so it goes across, but as you can see, the things that are attacking it goes for first, and that's one of its behavioural kind of traits. But as it goes on to explain, it will basically wipe out everything in a particular area. And as I say, that is kind of covered later on in the fact, so we won't go into it here. But yeah, as it travels through, it does just go through. Now, what it's actually doing attack-wise is impact damage. So it's a bit like my favourite tactic, which has been nerfed a bit with the changes to the spawners, of just driving over things, essentially. So it literally just heads towards them, crushes them. Yeah, there isn't really at the moment like a prioritisation thing. And again, this is another point that's discussed, so we'll talk about it later. But I think it'd be slightly better if it did prioritise certain things. Other than obviously it prioritises things that are attacking it. Although it seems to have there's like an element of some things it doesn't really regard as attacking it because they don't really do it any damage. But yeah, so as you see here, it pretty much wipes out this entire little mining outpost. Note the cloudy stuff that's going on here, this sort of dusty material. Yeah, it makes it difficult to see what's going on at the very least. So it's like a smoke, you know. But yes, so that's the worm, and basically it attacks things on the ground by crashing into them, essentially. The creature cruises over the lava river and demolishes your machines without even slowing. Your precious new mining drills that seemed so large and powerful just moments ago look like puny toys in the face of such an unfathomable beast. The Demolisher continues its path of destruction down the line of transport belts towards your base. But before getting there, it slows to a crawl and turns back into the volcanic wastelands. But this attack won't go unanswered. It's time for a fight. You pursue the Demolisher, an easy task given its thick, glowing trail. Lava on either side of you forces you to cross the trail to pursue the creature. The torn-up terrain is hot, but there are enough cool rock sections to step across it. As you do, the lingering ash cloud around it obscures your vision and the abrasive particles interfere with your exoskeleton equipment. You catch sight of the body again, this time up close. The thickly armoured plates of each segment seem to give it a good protection from heat and probably many of your weapons. It hasn't reacted to you yet, perhaps it has not seen you, or perhaps it does not care. You move towards the Demolisher's head and it still ignores you. The face appears to be a clear weak spot. It has no eyes and the skin still seems adapted to the heat, but the armour is much thinner around the jaws. Bracing yourself for a reaction, you shine your lasers at its face. But nothing. It continues to patrol some path, as though you were nothing but a speck of dust on the wind. A rocket to the face would surely provoke it, but before testing that theory, you place a line of landmines to secure your retreat. There's an immediate reaction from the creature, meaning to the rocket. It doesn't quite say that, but basically you shoot it with a rocket. It speeds up and turns towards you. Once again, rhythmic vibrations shake the terrain and generate a steadily expanding cloud of ash. The cloud quickly encompasses you. Obscured vision and snagged exoskeleton joints will limit your speed. You fire your submachine gun at the creature. Your piercing rounds cut into the Demolisher and do some damage. But by the time you reload a new magazine, all the damage you dealt has healed back. You try again for a few moments, inflicting some damage. But again, it seems to heal faster than you can deal damage. Vibrations coming from the creature seem to focus and amplify around you, destabilising the ground even more. The crust is thin at the best of times, and this isn't helping. A fissure starts to open up around your feet. You manage to dodge to the side as a volcanic eruption explodes in the area you stood a moment ago. Rock fragments, lava, and hot gases shred the area. You avoided the main blast, but just being close to the edge was enough to weaken your shields. Okay, next video then. It does again have some audio and some soundtrack stuff, so I will shut up and we'll just watch this through. Okay, so that's you fighting a Demolisher, or the engineer fighting a Demolisher, I should say. A couple of things interesting to note as it walks through the trail it leaves. It does sort of cause sparks and stuff to happen in this animation. As I understand it, that's it affecting your exoskeleton, and it does have a sort of a slowdown effect. Even this trail stuff, basically, because that's sort of one of its attacks. Comes up here, and as noted, they sort of switch on their laser defense and the PLD, and it does nothing basically. So the personal laser defense, it doesn't even seem to register the attack. Now, I believe it does do some damage, but it's so insignificant that it's almost basically not worth using them. But I may be wrong on that, and of course they may change the balance. Basically, it then lays down landmines, which is interesting because the attack that the Demolisher is doing does go on to just very specifically say this. It's basically it's difficult to show it a bit because it is a little subtle, but can you see how there's like an orange area that sort of appears and like grows, and then it suddenly turns into an explosion? It's basically the artillery explosion, the artillery shell explosion. That explosion is temporary. It's going to be replaced with an actual like lava explosion. But basically this here, the orangey part, there we go. That is like your clue that there's going to be an attack there. That's the equivalent of like the the targeting thing for an artillery. And so basically if you see one of them, move away from it because there's about to be a lava explosion. That's its attack, and as it happens, the landmines that is laid down are destroyed by the attack, so you don't see them affecting the worm. They do appear to be quite an effective thing for fighting worms, landmines, because it's something you can lay down very large numbers of and that are quite powerful. And, they can just sit there and wait, essentially. You can lay a big old path for them. And, of course, you can kite the enemy. This is one of the key things with it. And we will see it actually doing it, so I'll explain it later. But kiting the Demolishers is actually quite useful. And that's effectively what's happening there. The engineer is, getting the Demolisher to follow it in a sense because he's continuously attacking. And that's pretty much what happens. Switches to rockets there and starts lobbing those in. And then later on, we see the deployment of some combat drones. I think it describes them as destroyers, so it's difficult to tell with how tiny it is and sort of the quality, the compression algorithm, compression artifacts basically. But yeah, so get some combat robots on the go. Switches back to gun ammo at the actually, I'm not entirely sure the engineer is firing or just deploying drones. Might be using rockets, but obviously the drones are firing at the worm as well. And as you can see, it's taking a lot of hits. A bit like the Pentapod Stomper, it's taking a lot of damage and not really getting killed. Now, this is one of the key parts that's worth seeing, is that as it goes across the cliffs, it destroys the cliffs. So what you can actually do is kite them around and use them to destroy cliffs that are in the way. It's obviously a very high-risk tactic, and it does mention this as well, that you're going to basically end up, if you draw too near your base, they're going to flatten whatever's in the way. They just don't care what's there, and they just keep going. It does go over lava as well, so it can attack, and that's what's sort of being shown there. You see it going over the lava? It'll just go straight over the lava part. It doesn't care about lava, but of course you do, so you can get trapped, and it can be difficult to work around, especially since landfill for lava is a very late game tech. I think. I don't actually know. I've not unlocked it, but certainly you can't get the special landfill that they've been talking about as being something you can do on Nalvis, and that's pretty. But yes, so there it is. I really love the music as well. So in both of these, the music really fits. It actually feels like a piece of music that would play, because this is basically a kaiju. It's basically a giant monster that you're having to attack. It's like a boss type enemy. It's a single enemy that attacks you. It doesn't have it's not like biters spawning loads and loads of smaller enemies, mobs, mobile enemies. It's a single thing, great big tanky enemy that's not really affected by a lot of stuff. It's also got that classic kaiju Godzilla. It doesn't care that you're there. It doesn't even notice you until you attack it, and then it responds. The other thing it does do, it's a territorial animal is the idea, and this is mostly what the Friday Facts is about. So I won't again talk about that until there. But basically, yeah, it's like a territorial thing, and this is what it describes in the text, but doesn't really show in the first video, where it goes. The idea is, Erendel explains it, is that it sort of goes down that path of belts that you built, destroying them, and when it gets to the edge of its territory, it just decides, right, well, that's not affecting me anymore, I'm off, and it just goes back to its normal path. Obviously, when it's attacking, I don't know if you could tell that, but when it's doing its attack, I think it's slightly faster. It's not significant if it is, but to me that's moving a bit quicker than that. That seems to be like a crawling pace, and then this is its sort of attack speed. I think that's how it works. It sort of goes into an attack mode like a lot of the enemies and does that. So the other thing to note, it does do this. It is causing these lava eruption attacks, and can you see the cloud stuff there? That's meant to be like a force attack, a push attack, and that's meant to slow you down. So it's meant to try and sort of counter your exoskeleton, because even when it's in its attack mode, it's speeding up. It's actually still pretty slow, and lots of exoskeleton layers means you can run away. And that is kind of the intended challenge of it, in that it's up to you when you want to go and fight these things. They don't, although more on that later, they don't come and attack you, as it were, unless you're attacked or you build stuff in their territory. And so it's up to you to say, right, well, I want this territory, I'm going to kill this worm, basically. So yeah, this Demolisher. So yeah, interesting design idea. As I say, we'll talk about more about the LAN party experiences later on, basically. New fissures start to open up around you. These are easier to dodge now that you know to look for the fissure signs in the ground. That's the orange thing I was talking about. Standing far enough from the eruption is completely safe, but you'll need to stay on your toes. The Demolisher ploughs through the line of landmines and does not slow as it does so. They do more significant damage, but to your horror, the damage is gone in seconds. That was your escape plan. It's time to get moving. You try some more weapons as you move away, even throwing a few spare defender capsules into the mix. They're all somewhat effective, but the damage doesn't stick. You'll need to deal damage much faster, but you weren't prepared for that. While distracted, you fail to dodge a new volcanic eruption. The fissure erupts directly beneath you, shattering your shield and blanketing you in fire. Your power armor stops you from getting too singed, but another hit like that would be certain death. For now, this is not a fight you can win. You switch all your focus to dodging the eruptions and moving away. A few seconds after you stop firing, the Demolisher slows down and turns back. That's 2 wins for the Demolisher, but you'll live another day. So yeah, as I say, because it's territorial, if you kite it out and keep shooting at it, it will just keep coming for you. So you can use that to, as I say, kind of reshape the terrain that you want. It means that when you stop attacking it, it will stop attacking you, so long as you're outside of the territory. I think it's pretty much like a binary thing, so if it's not being attacked, it won't attack the thing, but it will go for stuff that is built in its area. So, say for example, if you put down a turret, and it's got no ammo in it, so it won't shoot it, a gun turret that is, but it's in its territory, it will attack it at the moment. A segmented enemy. The Demolisher is largely defined by our wish to have a very large enemy in the game. As explained in the Gribbly Enemies post, the larger a creature is, the more problematic it is for sprite sheets. For a conventional enemy, it is width times height times directions times animation frames. So what that's saying, that's basically, going back to that Gribbly post, it's basically explaining that the bigger it is, the more directions it can move, and the number of animation frames that there are, both in the game and that you want to cover, increases the number of sprites that you need to make, basically. So as per the Gribbly one, where it's moving all its leg round, those are different sprites as it extends and moves and goes to different angles and those sorts of things. They can do little bits with cheating it by sort of stretching things and stuff like that, but essentially you need a new sprite for every combination of width, height and direction and per animation frame. So any big enemy is going to require lots and lots and lots of new sprite sheets, and of course that's both not great for performance, you've got more sprites to load in and out and all that sort of thing, but also from an art point of view, it means you've got to make a lot more stuff, and that obviously means it takes a long time to do. Width and height are automatically larger, and generally a larger creature needs more directions and animation frames to look good, so conventional enemies don't scale well. In other words, when you're a tiny little thing, you can sort of get away with going in, just say up and down, left and right, and the diagonals. And so that any combination of those, if you just jink it, so if you want to go at a different angle, 30 degrees say, you can kind of be jinked down that angle and it won't really look too bad. But if you're big, and this was what they was talking about in the Gleba post, if you're really big and you move at those angles, then stuttering between 45 degrees and 90 degrees to do your animation looks horrible, basically. So you have to have more animations that represent it travelling at those different angles. Now obviously you're not going to have infinite, a circle has infinite number of steps in the degrees if you divide it up, so you kind of need to decide what is your dividing line between what's optimal, what your artist can achieve, and what's looks good, as it were. So that's the type of problem that you start introducing when you have a sprite based enemy. You can do things around, if it was some kind of robot enemy or something like that, you could say, right, well, this is the design, it only moves in fixed directions, something like that. And again, like with Gleba, one of the solutions there was to have, there's only one leg, there's only one version of a leg, and you just repeat it 5 times. So you instantly cut out, well, you don't need 5 animations, you can just turn it round into 5 angles. And so there are little cheats, and I say you can do things with stretching things and squishing things, but fundamentally the bigger it is, more animations it needs, basically. We identified early on that a segmented enemy was one of the ways that we could have a large enemy, because in theory we'd only need 1 animation frame. It would need more directions than normal to have smooth movement, but that's the same as a train. So what that's saying is that if it's a hard shell, then it doesn't really need to have any animation in it. It sounds like they are doing a little bit, but basically because it's a hard shell, you're not expecting it to deform or move in any way like that. So in the same way that in the legs you've got that sort of kneecap part, that can just be a fixed thing. It doesn't need to have lots of variations, because you can get away with it looking like, the leg is lifting up, but you can just, move it around. It doesn't necessarily need to become bigger or small or anything like that. So, you can sort of fudge those sorts of things. And as it says, if it's a hard carapace shell, a solid thing, it's not going to be flexing and moving and twisting and what have you, because you can just say, well, it's a hard carapace. But also, you can basically have as many of them as you want, because you could simply make them smaller in order to do the tail, make them bigger and smaller, so you don't necessarily need to have separate ones as such, you just have the code shrink them, basically. But also then, the whole point of them is that they have the exact same segment repeated over and over again. So basically, you just need one, and then you need to find some way of stringing a load of them together, basically. But of course, angle still remains important, so you still need to have lots and lots of versions of the same sprite, basically, at lots and lots of different angles, so that you can do them. You could probably do things with mirroring and flipping, because if you say that it's exactly the same segment, but then are you going to want to add decoratives, make them all look a little bit different? I don't think they do that, but you could do that to add some variation, and those could be procedurally added on. In the earliest and most basic text-only draft of the enemy types, we only had the basic category of animation method or movement. I won't list all the types we were considering, but it included leggy enemy and segmented enemy. Leggy enemy obviously becoming the Gleba one, segmented becoming the Vulcanus Wurms. We didn't know which type would go where though. For a while, the segmented enemy was going to be on Fulgora. This was because we knew the Fulgora landscape would have islands, so it made sense for a segmented enemy to be able to cruise the spaces between islands and give it an unbroken range. This would be another reason not to build in the quicksand. One of the problems with this though is the Dune franchise. We ended up in the segmented enemy on sand direction by following the natural progression of constraints, but most people wouldn't see that and just assume it's based on Dune anyway. Also, it doesn't have that unique and exciting feeling if it's too close to something you've seen before, so we decided to move segmented enemies anywhere else. So, I still think people are going to make quite a lot of Dune comparisons anyway. When you think about it, it isn't really, it doesn't actually go under the ground. It's hard carapace rather than Dune worms are more about tough skin, rather they're not really scaly. Also, obviously, I say they go underground. They do have, a worm-like structure in a sense. They've got a mouth at the front and then a long body. Obviously, they have the triple, three-pronged sort of, what you call it, beak thing or what have you. And this doesn't. This is more like an insectile type front to it. So there are a lot of differences, but I still think people are probably going to make a lot of Dune comparisons, but I don't think they are that similar really. To me, they're a bit more like a sort of, like a millipede type body meets a trilobite when you look at the face. So I think they are different and they are interesting, and the behaviour, is different. I do think, however, they should sort of crib the fact that, the worms are attracted in Dune are attracted by noise, or regular noise, basically. That it's the whole regularity of footsteps is what, the Fremen have to learn not to do. That's why machines get attacked by them and stuff like that, because it's regular repeating. And I think stealing that idea, and that would be why I would think it needs to filter down to certain things that it attacks, where, as I say, it talks about this later, but it currently just attacks everything basically that's in its territory. So that would let you build some things without getting attacked, Prototyping. After I'd finished the main prototype for Space Age, I shifted my focus to enemies. I made a new branch of the game just for prototyping enemies, never to be merged into the main game, just to prove out concepts and get something tangible for further discussions. An enemy sandpit, if you will. The leggy enemies went to Gleba. We didn't know if we wanted it to be more of a stomper or a strafer, so I added both options, expecting one to be chosen. In the end, both survived the cut, and we even got the little wrigglers too. The freezing planet had flying enemies, and among them were the jelly-like enemies from Friday Facts 367. And that's this guy. Prepare for disappointment. However, since then, these enemies have been dropped from the game. The last planet has a delicate mix of challenges, and although we found a way to add enemies to the mix in an interesting way, it would make progression much slower. It might be better as a mod. So the big reveal that our favourite jellyfish-headed Gribbly guy, they are not on the final planet. The reason for that is as described here. There's a delicate mix of challenges. So the final planet is tough enough in a sense that sticking enemies in was problematic, in the sense that you got to think at that stage, because you have to do each intermediate planet before going to the final one, you've done a lot. I mean a lot, and you're then sent into this final planet, and it's, as it says, delicate mix of challenges. So it's tough, is what they're saying. And adding in enemies was just too much. And they have always said that the point of this expansion is that it is less overwhelming, less huge, as it were, than the likes of SpaceX and, your combined Bobs and Angels and all that sort of stuff. It's not meant to be that scale of challenge. As I've said, I think it is big, particularly in your first, maybe a couple of playthroughs. It is a significant expansion, but they didn't want it to be staggeringly overwhelming. And particularly, if you go to the last planet and suddenly something eats all your stuff, that you've built, I think that's a bit unfair, and I sort of fully back the decision. I am really sad to see this go, though. I think this is a really interesting design, and they could have done a lot of, really interesting things with it. But yeah, I can kind of see why it's, like the underlying reason for removing it. I quite like this idea, though, so it might be better as a mod, that perhaps Arundel or whoever could put it out there as this is, you want a bit more challenge on Aquilo, then you can add this on, basically, and it'll appear there, maybe. The segmented enemy went to the volcanic planet. We didn't know exactly what it would do, so it was provisionally called things like Forge Worm, Magma Worm, and Lava Slug. The implementation for this in the prototype was basically a conga line of tanks with some clever code to make them follow the leader while adding some sinusoidal movement. Sinusoidal is just basically means that. The leader in this case was a unit, basically a giant biter, because that already has the necessary attack logic. And this is it basically, so it just says in the caption, the earliest prototype from years ago. This was testing the basic animation principle and the fire blood splashback when it takes damage. So the idea with this is, well, as you can see, it is literally just a great big line of tanks with a large biter at the front. This is, it's been scaled up, so it's not, I think behemoths are not far off that. No, actually, behemoth is kind of smaller than that. But yeah, it's like a biter with a whole load of tanks attached to its bottom, centipede style. What is interesting is it shows the damage across all of the segments, which is an important point for later. And the fire explosion thing, what's coming out there is meant to be like blood almost, that when you shoot it, it sort of squirts out blood, and that blood is fiery, and therefore getting too close to it and being too close will kind of damage you. That was one of the concepts they obviously had. If you notice as well, and obviously I'm sure Arundel didn't really bother about the health size and stuff, but it doesn't actually take that much damage to kill it, as you've seen in the thing, in the other videos. The actual demolishers do take a lot of damage, but in a particular way, and so we'll kind of get back to that. I suppose it is also used, about it is all using, explosive grenades, the, fragmentation grenades. So, they are dealing quite a lot of damage each. I just love this little thing. I don't know. It's quite funny watching it, whole conga line of tanks going along. Design. Moving the segmented enemy to a planet that is mostly land had a lot of consequences for the graphics. If the creature was in deep water or sand, then it would be reasonable to have most of the creature hidden below the surface, so you'd only see a few segments above the surface and gaps between them, e.g. head, gap, back, hump, gap, repeat, tail. In other words, it's that thing of, like the Dune Wurms basically, where if it's in a sandy environment or watery environment, it's going to be cresting out of that, that surface. And so what you'll actually see is its head coming out, and then, the body following it, and then there'd be a gap because the actual worm is doing that. So it's almost like the classic Loch Ness, thing where it's got the humps going out and, a head at the top. So that's kind of what you would expect if it is a creature that goes underground or into water or something like that. However, on the volcanic planet, we'd need to show all of the body above the surface at some point, and that removes the ability to have gaps between segments. In other words, if it's sat fully on a surface, this is why I was saying it's more like a snake in a way rather than a worm, because worms obviously do go underground. But if it's a snake, then it's just always going to be fully on the surface. So you don't get that thing where there's bits where it's going under the thing, but that also means that all of your segments can be basically the same, because you don't have to do anywhere they're half submerged or emerging or anything like that. You also get away. You don't have to do dirt spilling up as it breaks the surface or anything like that. So it leads to a sort of different set of design challenges basically. To start with, I was leaning more towards the Demolisher being much more alien, a creature that's barely biological as far as we'd recognise it. Something potentially nuclear powered that acts more like a force of nature as it scoops heavy isotopes from the soil. There were, of course, some more conventional options too. So this is very much leaning into, I would say, if it was nuclear powered, and what it was doing was just like chewing up the actual surface and extracting, uranium or what have you from the magma, whatever you want to call it, the lava, the solid crust, as it were. Then it's getting much more into the territory, I would say, of being a proper kaiju. It's got a really weird, different biology that is not in any way similar to ours, and it's difficult to figure out what it's doing and why it's doing it, etc., etc. These are all mostly head designs. In fact, they're all head designs, I think. Yeah, basically. So the top ones are sort of coloured, more concept sketchy, and these are a bit more sort of design drafty. There's all sorts of different head shapes. You can see some interesting design notes. This goes more like a snail, so that's like a snail head. I like this one. This looks like a proper monster. You then got these, which I assume this is meant to be more like almost like a boring thing that it, as it's crushing up the stone that it's eating, it's sort of, lots and lots of teeth going on, or like fronds to sort of move it back in. This looks like there's a shark. I never remember what it's called, but it has like this jaw that extends and grabs. That reminds me quite a lot of that one. Obviously, then you've got like tapeworms and all sorts of stuff as the inspiration. Maybe that one's more like a sort of what do you call it, like the cheesy bug, the trilobites and that sort of thing, where they've got like the more sort of flatter head, and these look a bit more aggressive looking. So yeah, all sorts of different concept designs for the actual creature. This one looks like it's proper battering ram going on. And so the caption just says some early concepts for head shapes. Albert wanted the enemies to be less alien and more Earth-inspired, so things progressed in a direction more inspired by a centipede or a millipede. It's quite funny that, because I was saying when the Gleba one about the independent movement of the legs, that would make things like millipede, centipede type designs possible. Actually, we were speculating in the comments about if it had that sort of thing where it had lots and lots of legs, you'd expect it to go over the top of things, that it can just crawl over the top of your walls, And I say this is different, but there's an aspect of that in that it can just ignore everything because it just bulldozes it through, including cliffs. So yeah, it's quite funny that that was what we were kind of speculating about. I was thinking more in terms of mods. I wasn't expecting the game to actually have this type of thing in it, but yeah. And you can also therefore think maybe underneath these things there is legs. That I say if it's inspired more like a millipede or a centipede, that it's got little crawling legs underneath, and that's what's pushing it along. And the segments are just like a protective thing that stop anything from like damaging or attacking its legs. A segmented unit has problems with sprite layering. By default, if a segment is further south than another segment, then it's sorted in front. So just to explain that might sound a bit random. By south, it just means south in terms of like what you can see. So, this is north, east, south, west, because of how they do the perspective in the game. So if something is south, it's therefore closer to the camera in a sense that anything that's more northern, for anything, so if that's the north, then anything that's in, south of that, if it's, height-wise above it, is going to obscure what's behind it. So that's just an underlying assumption in the code. There is no, well, this needs to be behind this sorting in the code. It just literally says position is, sort of further south, therefore it's on top, essentially. So, and I say it's because of the perspective. If something is in front from our perspective, it needs to be drawn on in front, basically. When sections of the body are rotating or turning a corner, then as segments face east or west, the overlapping order changes so a segment pops in front of another one. In other words, it's coming down south. Say the worm is coming down, okay? Then it's fine because it's going to draw all of the head and the first section, second section, third section of the body is all going to be drawn in the way you'd expect. Okay, as soon as it turns, so as soon as that angle changes, it's basically saying that it then changes the order essentially because now it's at 45 degrees or what have you, or 30 degrees or what have you. Then suddenly it's to some extent it's better if you think about it as it turns like the extreme of the corner, because what it would do is it would say, right, well that segment is now below that one, so now draw it in front, and of course you would get the sort of a popping as the the segments apparently moved behind and in front of one another. You can kind of think it through better than I can explain it, basically. A way to bypass this problem is by having every segment separated by a 45-degree slice, so that with Factorio's camera angle, a tail segment can always be sorted under the segment before it. So it's a cheat, basically. So it's basically saying, right, there's something here that's at 45 degrees, and therefore it must overlap with the thing that's in, that's north of it, essentially. And so they insert one of those each time, and that then means that it will be in the right order. I made a Demolisher model with a 45-degree slice to prove that the overlapping theory would work, but also to prove that it's possible to get an aesthetic design with this approach. Test footage straight from Blender. Note that even when the creature is going north, the head can be drawn over other body parts. This one here in particular, this guy, is like the best example. So as it goes north, so it's now heading north, you'll notice that the head is still on top, even though that's technically more north than the body sections. What the code should be doing, or what the code is trying to do, is basically say, right, well, these body sections are below the head, they're more south, so draw them on top. And so by using this 45-degree thing, they basically cheat that and say, right, no, it's okay, angle-wise, draw it in the correct order. I mean, the perspective angles are bonkers anyway. I've said this before, that the angle with which we view things in Factorio is really weird. And if you were sort of seeing them in real, as they're drawn, if you were then properly going into a first-person perspective, the whole thing would just look really weird and distorted because they have to make it look like it sort of should look, even though that's not correct in a sense. It's one of those interesting things of It's like a forced perspective, basically. It's not really there. There is no perspective in the game. It is a grid-based game, and yet they draw everything as if it has perspective. This was a big hit, so a final concept art version of the head was made to give a direction for the materials. And here it is. This is awesome. They've got to do an art book. But yeah, so this is the sort of final Demolisher concept. Notice it's sort of it's a real tough-looking, hard carapace. I love the fact that it's not quite shown there, but it has like the glowing underneath it. You can sort of see a kind of a glow underneath the segments. There you go. So it's got this sort of, is that just a different colour because it's underneath? But when you really see it, it's glowing underneath. So the thing is like almost made of lava in a sense. So it's really, really dynamic. And yeah, I just love this design. And the front, it's got sort of claws that sort of grabby. There's, a reminiscent note there of kind of the biter claws and things like that. So it keeps it within the same, design sort of aesthetic approach. But yeah, it really looks like something different. Again, you can kind of imagine legs under here, that are pushing it along, and, that's how it's moving. It's a leg-based movement. It's not like a worm would be, where it pushes itself along with its own body segments. This is more, there's legs under here doing the work. The design was signed off and sent to Jersey for extra details and texturing, then Lucas for some final adjustments. Thanks to Strangepan, the Demolisher was soon in the game. A boring enemy. The initial Demolisher in-game was a basic implementation. The only weapon that was firmly decided was that the face would do impact damage. There were a lot of other ideas floating around too, but it was hard to get everyone to agree on a direction. For a while, the decreed weapon was going to be that the Demolisher would have underground children which would pop up like worm turrets and shoot at things. We didn't go with that for various reasons. So in other words, it's moving along, presumably, instead of, like the explosions and things we've got at the moment. Instead, worms, lava worm, mini ones, pop up and, start doing some kind of attack, presumably a lava attack or something like that, rather than sort of the acid stuff we have at the moment. So yeah, interesting they didn't go at that. I mean, personally, I'm not a big fan of bosses in a game. It always seems like really weird and artificial to me. It's just not my type of game. But bosses that spawn other, like children, as it were, that smaller things, is just really annoying. It's like, the worst form of boss to me. So yeah, so I'm kind of glad they didn't do that one. This left the Demolisher stranded in the following state. Firstly, it didn't have any weapons except for the face hitting you. Secondly, it was fast enough to catch you without exoskeletons, so if you don't have them and you attract attention, you automatically die. If you have enough exoskeletons though, it just can't catch you, so there's no risk. Thirdly, it had a staggering number of hit points when combined with resistances. It took about 3 minutes of continuous fire with an automatic shotgun firing at the face to die. Using rockets instead was about the same. I assume the automatic shotgun is the combat shotgun, the one that, will do continuous fire. That's a lot of damage, and I'm guessing that was pre the buff, but, even so, 3 minutes of just sitting there hammering away with a shotgun is just ridiculous. Fourth, the main strategy to kill it was extremely boring. Just run around in a circle for 3 minutes until it dies, or you run out of ammo. If you do run out of ammo, collect more and continue. Fifth, there were other ways to kill it too, but they're either even slower but more resource efficient, or slightly faster but require way more preparation. And sixth, and most important, overall, it was very unfun. I started a new combat branch to change the Demolisher balance and add some new weapons. Defences. To start, I drastically reduced the health of the Demolisher from 80,000 to 30,000 and reduced the resistances, in particular the flat reduction to damage that makes most attacks barely have any effect. So this is that thing, it clearly had a general reduction to damage, so it doesn't matter what damage it is, but it has a general reduction, meaning that any attack that hits it doesn't do as much damage as you'd expect. That's how all the resistances work in the game, is that they reduce a percentage of the damage depending on what that damage type is. So it may have no resistance, which it does. It means it gets the full effect of whatever's hitting it, or it might have, say, a 30% reduction, which takes off 30%. It's why the maths gets quite complicated with the turrets and all that sort of stuff, because you get both buffs and, the biters have damage reduction. So yeah, so it sounded like it just had a generic one that said, right, remove 30% of all damage irrespective of what type. But also maybe it had higher resistances. A lot of that would make sense, wouldn't it, in terms of what the enemy is. It's tough, carapace, it doesn't care about certain types of damage and all that sort of stuff. So it would make sense, but if you're having to sit there for 3 minutes to just shooting it with a shotgun, it's not really adding anything that's fun. This took the expected time to kill, with a decent damage rate, from minutes to seconds. The main difficulty of killing it now is dealing with the very high regeneration rate of 1500 hit points per second. That's a lot of health recovery. And this is the key to fighting it, basically. Because what you need to do is like a high DPS, so damage per second. You need to be hitting it with things that do a lot of damage very quickly. So if you imagine there are weapons in the game that, they're quite slow firing, but they might be powerful. So the rocket, and they have mentioned they've tweaked this, but the rocket was always quite slow firing, but obviously did a lot of damage, particularly the explosive rocket. It would fire out relatively slow. I think Spidertron had a faster rate of fire than you could. Unlike, we have buffs in the game that increase the firing rate of bullets and the firing rate of lasers and things like that. So what it's effectively saying is you would want the speed buffs rather than necessarily the damage buffs, because you need to be able to whittle that health down faster than it recovers. This means that when you're fighting it, you can either beat its healing with your damage rate and it dies quickly, or you can't and you need to run away. Either way, the fight is over quickly. It doesn't waste your time, and both situations are interesting. Assuming that you lose the first battle, you can, hopefully, retreat and plan a new method of attack. Factorio has a lot of weapons to choose from, so this is a nice opportunity to try some new options. And, in particular, this fight rewards you for using different weapons in combination. So, landmines on their own might not work, but landmines plus turrets might. Defender capsules on their own might not work, but defender capsules plus a prepared poison cloud plus rockets might have a combined damage per second to do the trick. And I would say this is to me the most interesting aspect of it, because it introduces an enemy that really needs combined arms. That needs we've got to put in poison capsules and have a bunch of capsules and use uranium ammo or something, that we can deal huge amounts of damage per second, but we've not got the stocks to do that for 5 minutes. We've not got 500 combat drones, we've got 100 or what have you, and we can only deploy, whatever your follower count is, so you can pop out, say, 10 of them, and then you can lob in a load of poison, you rush up to it, and you attack it, and you hit it with the best ammo you've got, with plenty of buffs. Maybe you've also got your lasers in there, I'm not 100% sure, they're not really saying in this whether it has like 100% damage resistance to lasers. That was the implication from that video, that it just doesn't care about lasers at all, so it doesn't do any damage maybe. But yeah, basically you need to rush in there, loads and loads of damage all at the same time, as I say. And does a nuke, is a nuke the best answer? Do you want to make nukes and shit them in or what have you? So yeah, so I like this idea of it's up to you to come up with a strategy, and they're not necessarily better or worse. It just depends what you're producing as your weapons, how many buffs you've researched, etc, etc. One of the things that makes that really viable, as I say, is this territorial aspect, which they do go on to explain, is that you need to come up with a sort of a different strategy for something like biters, because it will keep spawning new mobile enemies, the new mobs, basically, the actual biters. It'll just keep spawning more and more of those. So you have to have a different strategy where you're basically doing both crowd control and, attacking the spawners and getting rid of the worms. And so that's a very different thought process. And in particular, obviously, biters respawn. You can obviously change the settings, but biters recolonize the area, and you've then got new nests to deal with. And they send out colonization groups. They actively attack you for pollution, etc, etc. This guy doesn't. This guy is, right, I want more territory. I want this particular tungsten patch or what have you. I need to go and deal with this Demolisher worm. This is my strategy for doing it. Let's see if that works. No, let's come up with another strategy, etc, etc. And so it gives you that more, it's more at your control whether you do the combat. And I say I really like that aspect to it. Offences. Offences meaning the opposite to defences, so that going on the offence versus going on the defence, rather than being offensive or committing an offence. I came up with 11 ideas for weapons that had good potential to be both effective and fun. That means on the worm. So this is now talking about the worm going on the offensive and basically attacking the player. What techniques is it doing that? As it says above, they only had the one attack, which was the headbutt smashes into you attack. After talking to some other people for some more time, we managed to get the list of good options to 13. A lot of the ideas were designed to be used in conjunction, so it included things ranging from flaming blood splashback to flamethrower holes on the sides to subterranean shockwave attacks. So the idea was when you engage in combat with the Demolisher, it deploys all of its techniques. A bit like how you'll get a swarm of biters and spitters and worms, I guess, and they all do their attack all at once at you, so you've got to deal with all of that. And this is the same thing. If it has multiple attacks, it does them all at once. It doesn't do it's not like a Dark Souls boss where it's, now it's going to do its sweep attack and now it's going to do its jump attack, and, you have to work out what it's doing, work out the timing, work out how to position yourself to cope with it, basically. So, the idea is it just pours on damage, say. Bit like how you need to kill it. With a definitive list of options, there was a meeting to decide on a set that would work together well. And in support of that meeting, Andor just did these thumbnails. And the caption says, some thumbnail sketches to help with explaining potential weapon mechanics, so that as they were going through them, reviewing the options, they could have a look at what was meant. So this here is like, this is horrible actually. This is the one I find the most, sort of creepiest, basically. It's basically like it's got eyes that vomit fire, so it's like squirting flame out of its eyes. I think then this is the one where it's meant to be on its body as well, and that all of these holes would jet fire out, so it's got its own flamethrower. This one, I guess, is some kind of beam attack, a sort of a, heat death ray. These are clearly meant to be projectile weapons, so this is it firing essentially lava missiles, lava bombs, something like that. We've then got two force attacks, so this is essentially, I think, what's in the game. This middle one here, where it has, fires out an attack and it causes a lava eruption underneath you. That's what's in the game. And then this one is more like just I think it described it as a shout at some point, where it basically, as it says there, it's got a roar or shockwave attack. If that's in the game as well, I'm not entirely sure. It doesn't, you can't really tell if it's in the graphics, as it were, so that might still be there, but I don't know. This one is the one I don't quite understand. I think maybe it's meant to be almost like some tongue that, fires out and sort of, attacks the player in some way, because it doesn't look like it's being thrown out like there. It doesn't look like it's beaming out, because you'd expect it to be a straight line. This looks like it's snaking its way out, and maybe it's meant to hit the player. It's sort of a tongue almost that comes out and whacks the player. So yeah, a couple of these are really quite creepy, and I don't know, they wouldn't be particularly this shooting lava bombs thing might be quite difficult to deal with, especially if it's doing this, because it's big thing, so it's going to have a lot of turrets on it effectively. We decided on two main abilities. Firstly, the Demolisher should have a roar or shockwave attack. If the shockwave hits you, you could be stunned or slowed. This would kick up a cloud of ash as the shockwave travels. The cloud would have a small, slow effect. The main intention for the cloud can't be disclosed yet, but if Vulcanus is your first planet, then the additional effect won't affect you. Do I know what's that's referring to? I think I might do, but that's an interesting statement. So I'm not 100% sure what that's actually referring to, but yeah, as I say, maybe. Anyway, but the basic idea is, so I think maybe instead of this wave coming out like a shockwave, it is more like in the video where it's sort of showing the cloud. So this cloudy stuff here is like the shockwave, and so maybe it's more like an area of effect attack where it's sort of saying, right, well, one of your advantages is the exoskeleton moving quickly. This big cloud comes out, this shockwave comes out, and that has a general slowing effect on the player. Secondly, the Demolisher would seismically trigger volcanic eruptions around a chosen moving target nearby. This would mean that when you're in combat with the creature, there's still some amount of threat. You're not 100% safe just by avoiding the head. So in other words, it can lob these volcano type attacks, these lava eruptions out. So the ones we see, I did find a good one, didn't I? So these here, these things can be anywhere. presumably within a sort of fixed radius. So if you're down the side and you're attacking its body, it can create these as well. They're not just focused around the head. It seemed like a good starting point, but Kovrex was away and not part of the discussion, so we just had to hope he'd be on board with the new plan when he got back. As I developed these two concepts, I extended them a little more to work better together. The eruptions changed to be more engaging by showing the place that they will explode ahead of time. This makes more sense graphically, but mainly it makes the whole battle a lot more interactive. The explosion damage can be far higher with the assumption that most explosions won't hit, but that's also great to make them a genuine threat. Now, instead of not caring about your position other than getting flattened by the head, you actually need to move around as different parts of the ground become unstable. It feels a lot more like a boss fight. If you're underpowered, then every explosion counts and you need to dodge it a lot. If you're overpowered, then you mainly just need to make sure you don't take many direct hits in quick succession, and only a small amount of occasional movement is needed for that. The eruptions are only used against moving targets. The lore reason for this is that it detects the vibrations in the ground made by moving targets, so it's easy to aim eruptions at those, and also that it doesn't consider static things to be much of a threat. The real game balance reason is that player health with shields is so much higher than turret health, so if the turrets are targeted by explosions, they die too quickly and it removes too many strategies from being viable. Okay, so we've got the actual sequence of concept art images. This is my painted concept for the fissure progression, so the lava eruptions. It's still used as a placeholder in the game, but will be replaced with a final version at some point. So yeah, so the worm is able to trigger a lava plume, a lava explosion, and this is it breaking through the surface. And as noted, what it just does is stick on the large explosion, so just the artillery explosion as to show the eruption, but that will be a proper art. So the idea here is that basically, as I say, it can launch these anywhere. So you can't sort of sit behind it. You can't follow along behind it, shooting its bum and be safe from these. It will constantly spawn them. And because they are concentrated damage things, so it doesn't sound like there's a big area of effect to them. It does sound like it has an area of effect, but it's relatively limited. It's not a big splash damage, basically. So in other words, if you're right on that explosion point, then even if you're quite powerful, you've got quite a lot of shields and what have you, a couple of those and you will die. So you do always need to be on the move. You can't just sit there. And I say otherwise, because the other attack it's got, that we know about, is the head thing. And so you could just avoid the head altogether and shoot it. But these are a powerful attack that stops you from doing that. For the shockwave ash cloud effect, it being a stun was either too punishing if you got caught close to the head or near an eruption, or irrelevant in all other cases. So the shockwave, I guess because it's focused on that, if that was how it worked, one of these two, then, it would too much, basically, if you were too close. But if you were far enough away, it was completely irrelevant. I changed it to be more of a persistent slow, but not a slow in the same way that other slows work in the game. Instead of being a flat percentage reduction, the effect is more like a max speed with a percentage of effectiveness. If you don't have any exoskeletons, then you're barely affected. But if you have loads of exoskeletons, it will take you most of the way back to your natural speed. Okay. So it's effectively scaling it to whatever boost you've got. And that's when it was doing the story time. It was talking about the gumming up your exoskeleton legs. I think the idea is the ash gets in those exoskeletons and slows them down. But of course, if you're not wearing an exoskeleton, it's not really going to have any effect on you. So it basically brings you down to running speed, walking speed, and of course we know that the Demolisher is faster than that, because it can catch you if you haven't got any legs on. So as you're getting hit by this slow effect, it's keeping you within range, sort of thing. So it makes it a challenge to run away even. Keeping the range of player speed to a slower, more narrow range is an important change for a few reasons. The Demolisher speed can be much lower too, so that the player is always slightly faster and can escape, but the difference with any exoskeletons is not as extreme. Okay, so they've clearly slowed him down so that you can get away, which makes sense. I mean, I think that's fairer, isn't it? That if you trigger an attack and you can't actually kill it, then just automatic dying is a bit of a harsh punishment. But if you can get away from it, then it gives you a bit of a chance. The eruptions can form slower and still have a chance of hitting. In other words, you're sufficiently slow that if they're welling up, there's a good chance of them hitting you, or a better chance of them hitting you. Exoskeletons are still very relevant though, because even a small movement speed bonus helps you dodge an eruption, especially if you fired a weapon recently. As part of the branch, I also added various visuals for the ash cloud, trail effects, and placeholder eruption effects. This branch was made while Covrex was away, so we weren't sure what he'd think of it. The Demolisher combat was something that had resisted agreed consensus for over a year at that point. I guess that's a very, very polite way of saying it. Everyone was just arguing about it all the time, but there you go. Towards the end of the work on this branch, the work started to represent a large investment of hours, which isn't ideal for something that wasn't at all signed off. But deadlines were looming and things just needed to be done. Fortunately, when he got back, it all got signed off shortly before the LAN playtesting event, so it was playable for the playtesters. However, there wasn't time for all of my scripted Lua code to get ported to C++, meaning that we had 100 plus people playing with code that was never meant to exist outside of an experimental branch. Yes, so obviously we did get to play with it at the LAN. They did mention, some of the devs, that it had literally gone in just before the event, basically. So we were kind of the first guinea pigs for it. Obviously they had the experimental versions and all that sort of stuff, but yeah, we were the ones playing it for the first time properly. There were some feedbacks that I'll talk about later, but it sounds like those have probably been fixed already. One of the big things that I would say about it is that the way, and this is specifically mentioned, but the way it communicates things to the player needed some tweaks and work, and I say that's not surprising if it's literally just gone in and people are testing it for the first time. The first thing they're going to do is make it so that it's a bit more communicative as to what's going on. But yes, as I say, the reaction to them was great. I think overall it was very, people were interested to see them. I think people did get a little frustrated by the damage that they did. And as I say, that was more to do with, well, how do I kill it? I don't understand what I need to do to get rid of it. How does it attack? And particularly around the territories thing, there were people whose reactions were, well, I don't know why it's attacked me. It's not clear what's going on here. Why is it diverted and attacked all my stuff? And particularly I think, and this is probably a reflection of this code being the experimental code and not really meant to be in there, it wasn't, I don't think, consistent. So you could build something one time and the worm would just go past, build it another time and it would come over and trash it. So that's clearly something to do with how it's making an assessment of, is that stuff in my territory? And I say that's entirely expected if it was experimental code, because it's not going to necessarily be fine-tuned in the way it needs to be. So I'm trying to be quite caveaty about this, because I'm just very aware that the comments about Gleba not being everyone's favourite planet, shall we say, were perhaps taken a little bit over-exaggerated in a sense by the community. Partly that is a reflection. I've said this in some of the comments on the videos, replying to people on comments, that this is still a game in development, and so things that are really balance changes, they have time to do, particularly. So this, if the health on the worm or what have you is too high, just bring it down and people can play that and say, oh yeah, that's better, I prefer that. Or maybe it's too squishy, and say, actually, a bit more health would be good. Or that healing rate, you can tweak that number. You're literally changing a number, doing a bit of playing and saying, is that better? Is that worse? Etc., etc. So there is a lot of stuff in this version, this beta, that is like that. They're just fine-tuning it and tweaking it. And as it says there, maybe there's a bit of experimental code and someone just needs to go through and tidy it up and make it talk to all the bits of other code that it needs to. So I say, I am just trying to make sure it's very clear that things I'm saying about the LAN party we were a bunch of guinea pigs, basically. We were playtesters, that's what we were there for. That's what we were doing. We were playtesting this as an expansion. And so what we were giving was the feedback. And whether, Woo kind of does anything about that is up to them. But I don't, I'm just very concerned that I don't want to, start off any, oh no, it's all terrible, it's all wrong, it's all broken, it's not gonna be fun type of thing. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that people at the LAN, from my experience, from my teammates, they were kind of saying that it's not clear why it's doing things. It's not clear how I kill it. And Erendel literally goes on to explain the things they're putting in, by the sound of things, to fix those. It's the part of the problem is that thing of people just don't know how games are made and they don't know how software is developed and stuff like that. So I think people get it's a bit like, if you're watching a film and the script is just bad, it's like unfixable. But games aren't like that, you can tweak a number, you can add a new sprite, you can do a bit of polishing, because it's about the actual gameplay being fun. It's not about, well, this story doesn't make sense necessarily. I mean, in these types of games, obviously in story-based games, that is what it's about. But in this type of game, sandbox game, you're not changing the plot, you're not doing that sort of stuff. You're tweaking the numbers to make it more fun, and you can do that right up to release day, and beyond, actually. And I think people don't get that sort of stuff. They just sort of say, Tristan just said, the Wurms weren't fun. I think they were fun. I think people did find them fun. They just didn't get the feedback and the communication they were expecting. Territories. The territory system is a completely new mechanic. I designed a system that uses Voronoi, not sure on the pronunciation of that, but Voronoi noise to make distinct regions that demolishers can claim and protect. If you build a demolisher territory, it will get annoyed and earn its name. The system was built by Strangepan and Genhis. So I don't really know the it's called Wally noise or Voronoi noise, and it produces things like this, which is interesting. It's sort of blobby by the looks of things. So it looks, I mean, if looking at these images here, it's almost like a bubble thing. I mean, they're not bubbles, but the thing where you get lots and lots of little bubbles, and every bubble is trying to have like the minimum surface area, and so when two bubbles touch, they'll form a straight line, basically, because that represents the the smallest surface area contact point between the two. And so you're getting that sort of effect going on where these could be bubbles, and say as they're touching other bubbles, they form those straight lines. So you get that sort of odd weird thing of a bubble is a perfect circle, and then touching other bubbles, it becomes a set of straight lines, basically. So, which makes sense for what's being produced here. You can see these as being those cells, those bubbles, essentially, and all sort of meshed together. Demolishers patrol near the edge of their territory, and you can see these patrol paths from decoratives on the ground, which are work in progress. You can also see demolisher territories on the map. And this is the map view. The caption just says, orthogonal lines, orthogonal just means at right angles to each other, which is why it's this square sawtooth pattern. Orthogonal lines mark territory edges, and the demolisher patrol path is close to the edge. Areas with diagonal red lines are the danger zones. I mean, it's all danger zones because they're all occupied territories. I'm not going to say how it's different or how it was done for the LAN party, but it was not shown like this. Okay, I think if this is what they're going to put in the game, or at least I couldn't, I never clicked on a button that showed this type of thing. If they're going to put this in the game, I think this would be a massive improvement. Just showing these territories. I think they could maybe do something with color, that color thing where you can color every tessellated pattern with 3 colours or something like that. That might help a little from just sort of readability, or maybe make the lines thicker or something like that, because these are quite similar and you can't really tell. The one thing I would point out, if you can't see it, or you're not sort of you're not noticed it, these are the Wurms. So these are the Wurms patrolling their territory. They do look a little unfortunate in their shape. They look a little bit like poops, shall we say. But yes, these are the Wurms patrolling their territory, and clearly the idea is they go along the edges. So I can't really explain to you how it was different in the LAN version, but I think this is a more clear way of communicating the information, that being able to turn this on as a filter, and as I say, maybe it's a debug option at the moment or something like that, but having this as a turn on these territories would be, I think, really good solution, because then you'll be able to see for definite that all of this is built within the safe zone, and that this is then the risky zone. And you can also understand the edges being a bit fuzzy, that maybe the worm comes round at the path it's chosen is like that, it's more going across there, so if something is just on the edge it doesn't notice. But then if it's taking a path that's maybe coming down more, it can see it and attack it. So I think this might be a clearer way of communicating what's going on than what we had. And I say I'm hoping that this is something they put in the game and maybe no one realised because they didn't turn it on in in debug sort of thing. So yeah, I think having this as the default would be a good thing. The planet's starting coal, calcite, sulfuric acid, and most of the starting ashlands region are not covered by demolisher territories. So that's the big gap in the middle there. That's your sort of free build area. This gives you a safe area to make a factory and get the basics set up. The starting tungsten patch is in the territory of a small demolisher, so to get the planet's science pack, you'll either need to defeat it or engage in some guerrilla mining operations. So it's deliberately forcing you to engage engage with the system basically. And it sounds like what you could probably do is basically wait for the demolisher to pass and get a safe distance away, run in, do a bit of mining, and then as it comes back around again, pick up all your mine stuff and run away. So that might be one way of doing it if you're a bit underpowered for when you've got to the planet. We're considering adjusting the rules for which buildings in a territory provoke an attack because we have some options such as all structures, which is the current rule, active structures, or only mining structures. My feedback on that, and I say it does push it a bit more into the Dune territory, but I think it should be mining structures. I think that should be the thing, that it just goes for anything that's making a lot of noise, that if you say it does have some kind of, its food is the actual lava itself, that it eats the crust and gets its minerals and what have you from that. Maybe it's a silicon-based life form, it absorbs the silicon or something like that. And so as something that is eating, because that then you could feel that would be simulating. So if these are territorial animals, then you could kind of see that what it's going to do is it's going to defend its territory. And so if you say that these tungsten patches and the sulfur patches are kind of what it has as food, those are its food sources or its important resources or what have you, or maybe that's how it's attracting mates or something like that, then the idea that as you mine these, it interprets that as being another worm, taking its resources, taking its stuff, and so it comes and attacks them. And so to me that makes a bit more logical sense than just there is some stuff here, it attacks it. One of the questions with that, it's like a little bit inconsistent for me, the sort of it attacks everything, because when you're just stood there, it won't attack you. It's not going to attack you. And if you just build anything, then it attacks the thing that's built. Well, why is it doing that? Why is it regarding you as not a danger, and yet something you've built, which could be a power pole, it could be nothing. Why is that then must attack structure? To me, I think it needs to be something a bit more thematic, I would say. But, it would still be interesting if it just attacks everything. I think that's fine. It's not a problem as such. But so to me, it says, and you could maybe, include the foundry in it, because it's this big, noisy building that's, within the Demolisher's attention span. So it attacks that, and it could maybe attack trains as well, or something like that. But the things that make a lot of noise, I think, is possibly, the thing for it to go for. Demolishers don't have spawners. The whole creature spawns directly on the map. If you kill one of these ancient creatures, then their territory becomes yours permanently. We're off exterminating the local wildlife again. There's no pollution. Demolishers are only provoked by you building in their territory or damaging them. There's no evolution. Demolisher size is only controlled by distance from the starting area. This is kind of revealing that there are bigger worms. There are bigger demolishers. Again, I can't really tell you anything about them, but they are big, is all I would say. And you can infer from how it does this whole thing in the game generally, how that might work, that you've got, green, gold and red pentapods. You've got small, medium, big behemoth biters. It's kind of how the game works when it's doing these things, so I think you can infer from that everything you need to know, really. But yeah, I can't really explain further than basically that there are bigger ones, as it says, and that they get bigger the further you go out from the starting area. Combat testing. I found many ways to kill all sizes of Demolisher at all tech level, within reason. But for every successful way I found, there are many more unsuccessful ways. I was looking forward to people encountering Demolishers during the playtesting event, so I joined different servers to watch the first encounters. I'd estimate that at least 60% of the players survived their first encounter just by panicking and immediately running away. For players that tried to fight, I didn't see anyone get a kill on their first try, and only 25% survived their first try. Every server killed at least one Demolisher, but the ways that this happened were wildly different. Players even found one way that I didn't think would work, but I don't want to spoil successful strategies. The big Demolishers are much more difficult to kill. There are ways to do it early game, but it's not easy and it's a big investment. For many players, I expect them to wait for tech from other planets before killing big Demolishers. So here's a big one, I assume. It looks bigger anyway, looking at the size of this compared to the one in the video, but obviously it doesn't specifically confirm. And it does say you can lure demolishers to follow you and force them to destroy cliffs, but be careful about leading them back to your base. So yeah, so this is clearly the idea is that this has been kited over in order to destroy some cliffs, and then basically it's got too close to the base and completely trashed it. So yeah. Combat clarity improvements. We're continuing to update the balance, but right now the biggest problem is not with the combat stats themselves, but with transparency and feedback to the player. For example, at the moment, if you alt-click a segment, then Factorio shows you the body resistances, but you need to click on the head to see the head resistances. Ideally, all body parts link to the same page, which can show you both sets of resistances. Likewise, we need to clarify somewhere that segments take damage individually, but all damage is transferred to the creature as a whole, which is really the head. In other words, the segments have different damage resistance, so the head, and I don't know if there are different resistances for the different segments. I should suspect not. I think it's just the head and the actual body, but then that basically is going to colour your strategy. You know, are you going to go for the head, or are you going to focus your fire on the back parts, and knowing that maybe, I don't know, the back parts are maybe tougher, and therefore, I don't actually know what they are, but maybe they're tougher, and you'd have to think, right, well, I need more ammo, I need more whatever tactic I'm using, whereas if I go for the head, I need less, but of course it's got it's the most dangerous part, so I need to be careful. And so yeah, so Factorio is kind of not linking everything together to see what's going on, and in particular the health thing. So it's a single health pool, basically, so at the moment, it sounds like it's kind of inferring that each segment has a health, whereas in fact it's just a single health pool. Demolishers have no resistance to poison capsules. It's not a hint to use poison capsules, it's just because poison damage is so weak compared to other damage types that adding a resistance doesn't make sense. The problem is that if you test one poison capsule on a Demolisher, it looks like no damage is dealt, because the regeneration is higher than the damage of a few poison capsules, even if they hit multiple segments. So, the damage is healed instantly and the health bar doesn't even appear. The reality is that they do offset some of the regeneration, but that isn't communicated. If we make the health bar linger for a moment after any damage, then it will make that situation clearer. These are the sort of small adjustments we will be making over the coming weeks. Conclusion. The Demolishers aren't finished. Some graphics and other small details are still in progress. For example, the eruption explosions are still the generic huge explosion, but we're part way through a more appropriate lava-based animation that doesn't obscure the player so much. We're also intending for the Demolishers to have more sinusoidal motion, but some other things need to be completed first. So, as I've tried to explain, the fact that they're not finished isn't a problem. Okay, don't panic. They're nearly there. They just need some tweaks. They need some artwork. You know, they need some, guess it sounds like other systems to be introduced for this sinusoidal motion, the wavy motion. But yes, so they aren't quite done, but there's whatever it is now, 4 weeks to go. So they've got time to introduce these adjustments. Unlike other planets, where the expectation is that casual defences usually win, on Vulcanus, casual defences will usually lose. That's fine though, because generally they're not a threat to your base, only new expansions. Also, on Vulcanus, most of what you're building in outposts is sort of free stuff from lava anyway, so it being demolished is not a big loss. There's no need to build perimeter walls, and a typical line of turrets is one of the worst formations you can make, because the Demolisher will cruise straight down it. But yes, this is this thing again of, on Vulcanus, because you have the lava mechanic, and it's basically everything becomes almost cost-free. You know, if you arrive with a bit of stuff, then you can start doing foundries and all this, you know, all this building, and you just, I think, was it Trupan used the phrase that you're just printing stuff, you know, because you're just literally sucking lava out, get the stuff, you know, throw the stone away type of thing, and that's it. You don't have to worry about, you know, mining patches in order to get things like belts and I think the foundries themselves and big mining drills. You know, the tungsten is limited, the coal is limited, things like that. But, you know, sulfur, lava, I mean, you get an awful lot of resources basically for free. And so that's what that's referring to. So stuff getting destroyed, blown up is perhaps not as costly, you know, not as disappointing as it would be on Nalvis, say, where you've got to go and find a new mining patch in order to, you know, rebuild your base sort of thing. From playtesting, there's a mixed sentiment on their difficulty level. Some players feel the Demolishers are overpowered, and others think that they are in a good place. If Demolishers were a conventional enemy, then they would be too strong at the current level. But the fact is that they are not a conventional enemy due to their territory system. They don't attack your base the way other enemies do. Maybe the eruptions are a bit too lethal, but we can adjust that. Overall difficulty seems to be okay because you have a lot of options and you are given the space and time to find the option that's best for you. Without spoiling specific strategies, the broader categories you have are a good combination of personal weapons with well-executed combat, a static defense strategy that can be reused for multiple territories by luring in distant enemies, import special weapons from other planets, wait for more damage upgrade techs and quality to make all strategies better. Demolisher combat can be fun and strategic. Each one is a boss fight to unlock a new territory. Demolishers are definitely the toughest enemy in the game. When something which at first seemed impossible to kill can later be killed quickly and efficiently due to a well-executed plan, it is very satisfying. As always, face tank every obstacle and leave your thoughts in the usual places. Okay, so I did the discussion stuff during the video because it's another monster Friday Facts. I think I mentioned might have been 2 Friday Facts ago that we were probably going to get one big Friday Facts before the release. I mean, we might get others, obviously, but this was the one I was thinking about. I kind of thought that they would reveal the Wormy boys before doing the release. I am pretty sure we will not get any details about the final planet and the final mechanic from the Friday Facts, and as noted, I will be respecting the request and not talking about that until the actual after the release date. So yeah, there's one big area there at the least that you don't know about, and I will not be talking about, but this was the big one I was expecting, the big other reveal, so don't be surprised if we now get whatever it would be, like 3 quality of life ones and then, the trailer basically. So yeah. My overall reaction to these guys is I really like the concept of them. As noted, and I think this would be a massive improvement if we could get this, displayed in this way. Maybe make these guys stand out a bit more, maybe make the territories, that 3-colour different, the colouring thing, just to make them stand out. I mean, I get why they're red, because it's danger zone, but all being red is not very distinct. But yes, I think presenting things in this way, and also things like, as Erendor said, when you're damaging it, the damage bar does appear, it doesn't really go down, so you understand, oh yeah, it is doing some damage, but not enough damage. I think that would be something that would be really good. But yes, I really like the concept of this enemy. I quite like the idea of a territory enemy, and it's up to you to decide, are you going to go for it? Are you going to just work with the space you've got, etc., or what have you? But then forcing you to go to the first tungsten patch and take on the first worm is quite an interesting idea. And that was obviously, so just to note, the starting area is smaller, and I think they've already taken out a worm, and that's why that patch is being mined. In fact, I think also several have been taken out on this, but yes, and then the idea that as you go further out, they're more powerful, they're bigger, and you therefore need to tech up in order to take them out, but it remains entirely your choice. You can do it if you want or not. Yes, I guess the other thing I could just comment on is the old jelly-like enemy. Interesting, it's called a jelly-like enemy, but the sort of jellyfish one, with the tentacles, this guy here, the loss of that is, I guess, a bit disappointing, really. As I said during the discussion part during the video, I do fully understand it. Several of them did mention that they couldn't really find a thing that was like fun, but also not just, this is just yet another thing that we're heaping on top of you after you've played for, I don't know, X number of hundreds of hours or what have you, particularly on your first playthrough. Getting there, you're sort of worn out, and suddenly it's like whatever mechanics they were testing out and stuff, these guys started becoming a problem, and it was just like, more problems. So I do fully get that, and I do very much like the idea of it being a mod. I think that's really well worth doing, getting this introduced, and maybe it could have several different mechanics. You could do different mods with it. It uses different ways of fighting. And I do like the way they are using different mechanics, because they could have just stuck biters on every planet, and it would have made sense in a way. But yeah, that Vulcanus has this molten lava worm, and Gleba has the weird monster creature, and biters on Nalvis and what have you. I love that they are very different things, and that there's different sort of tactics and approaches that you need for each, and perhaps there's not quite so much, I said in my combat video that I've seen, but I've not really done a lot of combat. There doesn't seem to be this rock, paper, scissors type of thing where, the weapon on whatever, Fulgora or something, the Tesla turret is, particularly useful against the Gleba enemies, and then the Gleba weapon is useful against the Vulcanus enemies. And so that doesn't really seem to be too much of a thing, really. It seems to be more like they're generally useful, that they're, you get a new weapon system and it's generally useful against everything, which I think is perfectly fine. It makes sense as well because otherwise you would possibly force people to go in a certain route, and they wanted it to be a bit more open. So yeah, I do fully kind of get that one. I think I said, if I wasn't clear, I really love the design of it as well. It's like very simple, in a way, but like really cool. I really love the way it moves and stuff as well. I'd quite like this guy to go in as a mod as well, Mr. Tanky Biter. But yeah, I quite like the way that it moves, and it does look like it's walking along on segments rather than being a worm, like a worm style movement because what they do is they pulse their muscles and it sort of creeps them forward, and snakes do a very similar thing, or can do anyway. They have several locomotion methods, snakes, but this does look like under these skirts, like a woodlouse, cheesy bug. Then it's got little legs, skittering away, moving it along, basically. That feels quite appropriate somehow. I hope you enjoyed today's Friday Facts video and might consider coming back for another one. If you'd like to chat about the Friday Facts, then you can find me live streaming Factorio every weekend over on my Twitch channel @Trismegistus. Thanks for watching. Cheers. Obscured vision and snaggered?